2, 3.
Boa tarde a todos, os meus cumprimentos. Sejam todos bem-vindos ao nosso evento A Água que nos Conecta, Desafios para a Conservação e Restauração dos Sistemas Aquáticos. Esse evento é promovido pelo NAP Águas, da Fundação Araucária, assim como pela TWRA, Aliança Tropical de Pesquisa na Água. Também com as universidades e cursos de pós-graduação vinculados. Bem, esse evento não é apenas uma celebração, ele é uma ode à consciência e à preservação dos ambientes aquáticos em todo o planeta. O meu nome é Rosilene Luciana de Lariva, sou bióloga e professora na Universidade Estadual do Oeste do Paraná e também participo como membro da TWRA, Aliança Tropical da Água. Nesse momento, sou a diretora regional da sede Paraná. Também estarei coordenando este evento, né, como a organização geral e também como mediadora. Bem, antes de nós iniciarmos, então, as apresentações do dia de hoje, alguns informes do ponto de vista prático. Se você ainda não se inscreveu no nosso evento, nós disponibilizaremos nas nossas mídias e nos links, tanto no YouTube quanto aqui no chat do Zoom, para que você faça a sua inscrição e depois também receba o seu certificado. Eu agradeço, então, imensamente a todos os colaboradores que participaram da comissão organizadora desse evento, assim como todos os palestrantes que nos abrilhantam, né, com as suas apresentações e compartilhando os seus conhecimentos e expertises. Eu espero que o nosso evento seja muito proveitoso, com muita troca de informação e, o mais importante, que nós tenhamos engajamento na busca por conservação das águas, que é a nossa fonte primordial de vida. Então, é exatamente com esse tema, a água que nos conecta, que surgiu a ideia embrionária deste evento, onde nós, então, congregamos uma série de especialistas e de pesquisadores, assim como membros da sociedade civil, com um único objetivo: unir esforços, conectando pessoas e conhecimentos, assim como gerarmos um engajamento em torno desse objetivo em comum. É fundamental, na atualidade, nós destacarmos toda a importância das fontes primordiais de água, assim como a necessidade de preservá-las. De acordo com a ONU, a Assembleia Nacional Geral da Organização das Nações Unidas, a água potável é um direito humano, né? E nós temos como meta estabelecer e assegurar a disponibilidade e gestão sustentável da água e do saneamento para todos os cidadãos do planeta. Portanto, né, diante de todo esse cenário, esse evento tem por objetivos disseminar e fomentar essas discussões a respeito tanto do panorama global da água, assim como das estratégias voltadas para a conservação da água em todo o mundo. Portanto, imbuídos, então, desse propósito, né, o evento ele iniciará essa noite com uma série de palestras a respeito de soluções baseadas na natureza, onde nós teremos palestrantes da Austrália que trarão a sua experiência e o seu conhecimento nesta área. Mas o nosso evento não finaliza aqui. Amanhã teremos o dia todo com atividades durante a manhã e à tarde com palestras de vários pesquisadores do mundo todo. Pela manhã teremos uma palestra com o Dr. Walter, da Alemanha, que trará experiências de 4 continentes do mundo. Assim como também teremos durante a manhã palestras sobre águas subterrâneas e as condições dos rios no Brasil. No período da tarde, teremos ainda experiências da América Latina, com pesquisadores do Uruguai e da Colômbia, assim como de várias partes do Brasil. E, para finalizar, né, com um abrilhantismo esse evento, na parte da tarde nós teremos vários palestrantes com engajamento da sociedade civil, como promotor e membros de comitês de bacia. Desta maneira, nós temos uma programação bastante intensa e esperamos que vocês tenham bastante proveito em relação a esse evento. Bem, então, sem delongas, diante da nossa abertura, vamos iniciar essa noite com o nosso evento, convidando a nossa coordenadora geral do NAP, que é a doutora Yara Moreto, para iniciar a sua fala de abertura desse evento. Então, seja muito bem-vinda, doutora Yara Moreto, e possa, né, contribuir com a sua fala no nosso evento. A doutora Yara é bióloga, formada pela Universidade Estadual de Maringá, com doutorado em Ecologia de Ambientes Aquáticos Continentais, pelo programa PEA-UEM no PERI. Suas pesquisas são relacionadas com macroinvertebrados e gestão de águas. E, atualmente, a professora Yara, né, atua na Universidade Federal do Paraná, campus de Palotina, assim como é a vice-diretora da TWRA, Aliança Tropical da e coordenadora do NAP, né, Fundação Araucária. Além disso, neste momento, a doutora Yara está como professora visitante na Austrália, na Universidade de Griffith, e, portanto, terá muita contribuição com o início do nosso evento. Muito boa noite, doutora Yara, e seja bem-vinda para a sua apresentação.
Muito obrigada, Rosilene. Boa noite para vocês aí no Brasil. Bom dia para quem nos acompanha aqui da Austrália. Então, é um prazer estar aqui novamente, né, podendo falar um pouco a respeito, né, das águas, especialmente com um tema tão importante como desse evento, que é a água que nos conecta, né, em comemoração aí ao Dia do Rio, e como mais uma atividade a ser apresentada, né, dentro do contexto da TWRA e também do NAP Águas. Então, os meus agradecimentos, né, a todos que estão participando e contribuindo com esse evento. Deixa eu compartilhar aqui a minha tela. Conseguem visualizar?
Sim, a apresentação.
Obrigada. Bom, então o tema de hoje, né, é justamente para trazer esse contexto, né, da importância do tema água, né, e as ações, né, que são realizadas dentro desse contexto em parceria, né, TWRA e NAP Águas, no qual, então, nós temos, né, a sede do Paraná, trabalhando em conjunto, tentando fazer essa interlocução universidade e sociedade, visando, né, a conservação de rios. E dentro desse contexto, né, quem é a TWRA? Então, nós somos uma organização social, né, sem fins lucrativos, e que está distribuída ao longo de todo o Brasil, uma organização internacional, né, em parceria Brasil-Austrália, e que nós temos, então, sedes distribuídas ao longo de todo o Brasil, e essas sedes, então, elas são responsáveis, né, por trazer temas que sejam de importância para o Estado, né, e também de maneira nacional. E também nós estamos em 3 estados e um território, no território do norte, aqui na Austrália. E a missão, então, da TWRA é justamente desenvolver, gerenciar, implementar metodologias, construir diagnósticos, propor ferramentas e modelos de gestão integrada dos ecossistemas aquáticos, em que possam estar envolvidos todos os atores sociais. Então, desde empresas, governo e sociedade, para solucionar problemas em bacias hidrográficas e ambientes marinhos, né, na região tropical. Então, dentro desse contexto do que é a TWRA, nós convidamos vocês também a nos conhecer e se integrar. Considerando, então, né, a nossa atuação no estado do Paraná, sempre em conjunto, né, em parceria, temos o programa NAP Águas, ou melhor, o programa NAP, que é do governo do estado do Paraná, né, organizado e coordenado pela Fundação Araucária, onde NAP são, então, os novos arranjos de pesquisa e inovação. E dentro desse contexto, o NAP Águas surgiu, então, né, em parceria, para que nós pudéssemos tratar especificamente dos temas voltados à água e, especialmente, ações que possam ser realizadas dentro de um contexto de um ecossistema de pesquisa e inovação, que foi proposto ali pela Fundação Araucária, visando uma especialização inteligente em que nós pudéssemos estar congregados num contexto de temas emergentes, transversais, estruturais, pensando nas rotas estratégicas para o estado do Paraná, tendo como condicionantes, né, transformação digital, desenvolvimento sustentável e alguns temas chaves também, como agricultura e agronegócios, biotecnologia e saúde, energias sustentáveis e renováveis, cidades inteligentes, sociedade, educação e economia. Atualmente são em torno de 40 NAPs e hoje, né, nós estamos falando aqui, e eu tenho, né, coordenado o NAP Águas dentro desse contexto de organização dos NAPs, tratando especialmente do tema vulnerabilidade climática associada às águas, né? Então, existe uma plataforma que é chamada de Araucária, e nessa plataforma podem ser encontrados, então, os projetos que estão, né, sendo desenvolvidos pelo NAP Águas. Nós temos um projeto bastante grande, que começou no final de 2021, e nesse projeto, então, eu vou falar um pouquinho mais especificamente sobre ele, mas dentro desse contexto, o tema principal dos projetos, né, que podem ser submetidos ao NAP Águas, versam, então, dentro de um papel estratégico de desenvolvimento regional, né, pensando em produção, em conservação de recursos e biodiversidade, uso e reuso de água e sustentabilidade. Além de políticas públicas, né, na área de agricultura, agronegócios e ambiente, onde nós temos, né, o maior uso da água e também os maiores impactos, e isso merece, então, um cuidado e uma atenção, especialmente no contexto da pesquisa, dos gestores, dos formadores de opinião, porque a água é o nosso patrimônio, né? E nós precisamos, então, tratar desse tema com toda a transversalidade, multidisciplinaridade e responsabilidade que ela merece, né? Existem inúmeros parceiros que constituem o NAP hoje. Eu trouxe aqui alguns exemplos para vocês, né? Então, nós temos aí o CIMEPAR, que é um dos grandes parceiros do projeto, especialmente porque nós estamos tratando do tema mudanças climáticas relacionadas à água, e o CIMEPAR é o site que vai hospedar, então, o banco de dados que vai ser criado com esse projeto, além, né, de todas as outras instituições. Então, Instituto Água e Terra, Sanepar, os comitês de bacia, as demais instituições de ensino superior para além da UFPR e também a TWRA. Em termos de números, né, falando especificamente aí do NAP Águas, nós temos em torno de 20 ICTs envolvidas, então universidades, institutos, secretarias, comitês, além da iniciativa privada. O projeto, né, que está sendo desenvolvido agora em nível estadual, com um alcance, né, também internacional. 2 coordenadores para esse projeto, que somos eu e o professor Sandro Froner, além de todos os demais pesquisadores e coordenadores de setores ali, de grupos de trabalho dentro desse projeto. Então, temos esse em andamento e mais 2 projetos aí em construção, com um total atual de 7 bolsas de pós-doutorado, 2 de doutorado, um apoio técnico, produção científica, além da nossa produção científica, né? Então, isso tudo dentro do contexto, né, de fomento de quase R$2 milhões para esse projeto. E dentro, né, de tudo isso que envolve trabalhar com água, e trazendo um pouco, né, para o tema conservação de rios, Nós temos, então, que a bacia hidrográfica é sempre o nosso contexto principal, é sempre a partir de onde nós vamos começar a pensar e planejar os nossos trabalhos. E no caso do estado do Paraná, né, nós temos aí várias bacias hidrográficas que têm um interesse econômico e social e ambiental extremamente importante, né? Então, sempre tentando tratar dentro, né, do contexto dos setores que são importantes para o Estado também, então, setores emergentes, transversais e estruturais, fazendo esse diálogo, essa interlocução, para que nós tenhamos, a partir de dados técnicos, né, que venham das pesquisas realizadas aí nas universidades e nos institutos, informações que possam gerar, então, dados que sejam suficientes e que embasem decisões políticas dentro do contexto do melhor manejo e da melhor gestão da água. Esse projeto, né, que eu estou mencionando já desde o início, é chamado Indicadores e Índices de Vulnerabilidade e Exposição aos Efeitos das Mudanças Climáticas em Setores Estratégicos do Estado do Paraná, onde nós buscamos, então, a proposição e validação dos indicadores de vulnerabilidade dos ecossistemas naturais aquáticos, né, e associados ali à produção, para a criação de um banco de dados ambiental, social e econômico abrangendo o Estado como um todo. Então, nós partimos, né, de informações que estão sendo levantadas para a construção e busca e construção desses indicadores, que nos venham trazer, então, depois, a elaboração de índices também, que possam ser utilizados para apontar fragilidades, para apontar tendências ou mesmo vulnerabilidades em determinadas regiões, e que possam, então, ser base, ser ferramenta para um melhor manejo de condições aí de mudanças climáticas drásticas que estão acontecendo, como a gente bem tem percebido, né, não só no Brasil, como no mundo todo. Então, é um tema extremamente importante, em que nós avaliaremos, a partir de alguns aspectos metodológicos, e considerando também os objetivos do desenvolvimento sustentável, especialmente o 2, 6, 7, 9, 11 e 13, como que nós podemos avaliar e trazer esses indicadores e construir índices que possam nos dar informações mais concretas e objetivas em relação a 4 setores, que são os setores de ecossistema e serviços ecossistêmicos, zona costeira urbana, saúde urbana e infraestrutura de transporte nacional. Então, dentro desses setores, cada equipe, né, vai buscar, então, trazer quais são os melhores indicadores para as vulnerabilidades climáticas, né, que possam existir e como que nós podemos trabalhar dentro desse contexto. Então, a partir daí, as equipes, então, são constituídas, né? Nós já estamos aí com um bom tempo de trabalho, conseguimos fazer um amplo levantamento de dados a partir, né, dessa divisão de setores, como eu mencionei para vocês, buscando aí o desenvolvimento desse banco de dados e a implementação, então, de metodologias que possam nos trazer esses índices, então, partindo de uma maneira global e focando aqui no estado do Paraná, para que nós tenhamos não só a construção desse banco de dados, mas também informações concretas a respeito do estado, no contexto, né, dos recursos hídricos e dos sistemas de produção que são ali, então, associados e que utilizam, né, a água. Dentro desse período, nós conseguimos, então, uma síntese de 36 anos de pesquisas sobre mudanças climáticas e efeitos sobre esses setores estratégicos, tá? Então, esse artigo está em fase final aí, praticamente pronto para ser submetido à revista Environmental Science and Policy. Estamos aí nos ajustes, e é o primeiro produto, o primeiro resultado acadêmico, científico, né, e também para a sociedade em relação a essa questão dos índices, fora todo o contexto do banco de dados e tudo que o projeto tem feito, então, também de ações, né, concretas associadas aí com a sociedade civil, em parceria, eventos que têm sido promovidos. E o próximo passo, então, né, além da finalização desse projeto ao longo dos próximos anos, com a entrega do banco de dados, que é o maior produto esperado, né, para o estado do Paraná, e que vai trazer congregado em um único local, né, com o auxílio do CIMEPAR, um banco de dados concreto, né, e que possa ser acessível a todos os pesquisadores do Estado em relação aos recursos hídricos, além, né, de toda a modelagem de indicadores para o Estado. E os próximos passos são elaborações de novas propostas de fomento, também buscas de parceiros, que é constante, e aí fica o convite, né, para os paranaenses que possam, então, fazer parte, né, dessa nossa organização e instituição. Então, eu agradeço, né, a oportunidade de falar um pouco para vocês a respeito, né, do que tem sido feito mais focado no estado do Paraná. São inúmeros os projetos que a gente trabalha, mas hoje o foco é realmente trazer esse trabalho que é voltado para o estado do Paraná e que tem tudo a ver com o contexto, então, de rios, né, e daquilo que a gente precisa trabalhar em relação à água. Então, o meu muito obrigada aí a todos vocês. E eu gostaria de convidar, né, para dar sequência ao evento, a doutora Aniele, para que possa, então, dar continuidade, chamar os novos palestrantes, e eu fico à disposição. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, Yara. Boa noite a todos. Sejam bem-vindos à primeira sessão do evento, A Água que nos Conecta, intitulada Soluções Baseadas na Natureza em Áreas Urbanas. Meu nome é Aniele Oliveira, eu sou pós-doutoranda em Conservação e Manejo de Recursos Naturais pela UniOeste, no projeto que a Yara acabou de descrever, o NAP-Águas, e eu trabalho especificamente no levantamento do banco de dados das unidades de conservação do Paraná. Serei moderadora nesta sessão. Agradeço a presença de todos vocês. Desejo que essa sessão seja muito proveitosa, com muita informação. Nesta sessão, teremos as falas de 3 palestrantes. A doutora Cíntia Dotto, a doutora Vassiliki Bolomitis, representando um trabalho conjunto com a doutora Nathalie Barron, e a professora Júlia Cirilo. Lembro que as perguntas aos palestrantes podem ser feitas a qualquer momento pelo chat do Zoom ou do YouTube, e nós iremos transmiti-las aos palestrantes ao final das falas. Dando início, então, a primeira fala será da doutora Cíntia Dotto, que teve seu título de doutora pela Universidade de Monash e que lidera o projeto Water Sensitive City, na cidade de Melbourne, na Austrália, e fará a palestra Blue and Green Infrastructure of the City of Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Cynthia, welcome. It's a pleasure to hear from you. You have 15 minutes and the virtual floor from now.
Obrigada, Aniele. Vocês conseguem ouvir?
Perfeitamente.
Sim.
Obrigada. Eu vou fazer a minha apresentação em inglês porque fica mais fácil para falar dos termos técnicos, mas qualquer coisa é só colocar perguntas no chat, por favor. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Always a bit of a challenge at this time. All right. All right. I hope everybody can see. Please let me know if you cannot. I can't see the chat, so I'll leave for Aniele to monitor the questions, and happy to answer questions at the end. Good morning for the ones in Australia, and good evening for the ones in Brazil. It's a pleasure to be here today. We'll be talking a little bit about our blue-green approach for City of Melbourne. I have been away from academia for a while and have been more on the practitioner side. So today I'll talk to you about applied examples of blue-green approach in the City of Melbourne. I'm very happy to go into the details of the research underpinning this work or the specifications underpinning this work later on. All right, so I am the water sensitive city lead at City of Melbourne, and my role is to help advancing the city towards a more sustainable water management stage. For a snapshot, snapshot of the city, we are here at the southeast part of Australia. Our climate conditions are quite similar to the ones in the south of Brazil and Argentina, just for reference. The municipality is about 40 square kilometers and has a population of 200K. So this is really the inner Melbourne city, while the population living in the city is not too big. We have 1 million weekly visitors and working around the city. City of Melbourne and Greater Melbourne is increasingly growing, is highly attractive to immigrants who come here to study and work, and it's aimed to achieve 8 million plus in 2050. Today, we'll talk a little bit about blue-green infrastructure, which in fact has a lot of names around the world. Some of them could be nature-based solutions. Water-sensitive city urban design is the term highly used in Australia. Sustainable drainage systems, so blue-green infrastructure is part of that. Low-impact development, integrated water management. So all these work for a sustainable management of the water resources, and blue-green infrastructure is one of them. So just before I move on, what we characterize by blue-green infrastructure is really those systems where we have vegetation, which could be trees or understory planting, that is passively irrigated with stormwater runoff. Next slide, sorry. What are the drivers for City of Melbourne to adopt this approach that we call blue-green infrastructure or nature-based solutions? Initially, if we think about 15, 20 years ago, the main driver was really to help capture and filter urban stormwater runoff before it reached the waterways. It was really with a big focus on protecting waterway health and acknowledging that protecting waterway health starts within the catchment, and we need to work with how we deal with our stormwater before it reaches and degrades the waterway. So that has been part of our practice for quite a while. I would say let's last 15 almost to 20 years. But recently, the drivers for nature-based solutions, obviously, as we just heard our colleague speaking, is that climate change impacts are really here, and nature-based solutions are part of our adaptation response to these climate change impacts. That goes from extreme and more frequent droughts, mainly in Melbourne. We are already seeing that. More frequent intense rainfall events and extreme heat. And we know that when we combine and integrate water and greening, it helps us to adapt to all these impacts. Through my presentation, I'm really just going to go through some examples of what we have been doing. And today I really focused on the small scale adoption of nature-based solutions. We do work with various scales of nature-based solutions, ranging from street scale to precincts and city scale approach. But today I'm going to focus on that smaller scale work. Licky is going to talk later about a more integrated approach for a whole urban precinct. So what I thought is that I'm just going to guide you through some examples of what we have been doing around the city, and happy to answer any questions you may have. So I'm just going to talk through some projects we some recent projects we have been working on and describe what they mean and what they are providing to our city. This is an example of what we call water-sensitive urban design asset type, but let's call nature-based solution here, or blue-green infrastructure. This is a project recently delivered as part of a state government project that is expanding the metro networks. And this consists of 5 rain gardens and 29 passively irrigated trees. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. But these photos are showing us these rain gardens, which I believe are jardim de chuva in Portuguese, that aim to collect and filter stormwater runoff before it reaches the waterway. The benefits from these systems have been documented in research widespreadly, and they are the increasing pervious areas in highly built-up areas, runoff attenuation, stormwater pollution reduction, and assisting greening that is supported by self-watering assets, meaning that we would not require potable water to go and irrigate these assets. So this is an example of how the system is built, and I will just go through quickly another example, which is very similar, same type of benefits. They are usually located at a lower part of the streetscape and need to have a significant contributing drainage catchment that comes in, and as well they require a set of site context specific characteristics that will allow for their best function. Here is just a schematic of how we often build rain gardens around the city, and they consist basically of having stormwater runoff that comes through the curb channel and enters the system through the surface. It does pond on a little ponding area for few hours, and then starts percolating through a specific filter media soil that will help removing pollutants before the water reaches the waterway. And it can be 2 types. The water can either go into a perforated pipe that will connect to the stormwater network, or it can be completely open, can allow, depending on the underlying soils, it can allow for the treated water or filtered water to exfiltrate through the underlying soil. These systems were designed in Australia for the main reason in Melbourne to help us reducing total nitrogen and total phosphorus from stormwater. They have been identified as the biggest threat to our bay, to our waterways and bays. This changes depending on the land use across different cities, and other places in Australia would be more focused on removing heavy metals, and other probably could be working on removing pathogens or other things. However, these systems have been optimized to help us reducing nitrogens, heavy metals, and also some pathogens. This is a combination of planting and soil layers that will help us to achieve this benefit. These are now quite established in Australia and are adopted quite frequently in urban areas. They are small systems that can come into just as the examples I showed, they can just be as curb extensions or just take part of the streetscape in small scale. This is another project that shows an example of a similar rain garden, but here we have what we call rain garden triplets, which is a different variation of that system that we have seen, but these ones, they are more compacted for use when we don't have much space, and they consist of also having a tree on it. They provide the same benefits, helping us increasing impervious area in this incredibly built-up environment with so much impervious area, reduce runoff and stormwater pollution. And obviously a great outcome that we have been identified through the years is that this opportunity of having the stormwater coming through a spoon drain and entering the system is not only great to filter the water before it reaches our waterways, but it also provides a great environment for the tree to grow. Another thing we see in this project is this area here, if you can see my mouse, which is made of permeable pavement with some sort of structural soil underneath, which is a mixture of gravel and some fine soil that allow the water when it rains to percolate through this permeable system and store for a little bit in this structural soil trench, as we call, which allow then the trees to go through there, to grow through there, but also for their roots to access their water that is stored around there. So these are just examples of things that we have been adopting around the city, and this showing how that specific system works. So the water, this is referring to these ones that are rain garden tree pits. Remember, as I mentioned before, the water comes from the surface and has a little depth where it ponds for a couple of hours, goes through the filtration layer, and then joins the drainage system after filtered, if it has not been fully utilized by the tree roots. In that system, we also saw an example of a permeable pavement using for helping tree growth and root access to water. And in that case, it was a porous asphalt made of recycled tire, which is something we have been trialing in the city, followed by a filtration layer to help us filtering the stormwater. Similar systems we have, this is what we call infiltration trenches. So this is not really the need of having the water coming from the surface, but can collect water from surrounding surfaces and direct to this garden bed with trees or not. In this system, they are very useful as well if we want to put some calming measures to calm traffic within our smaller streets. Instead of just putting speed bumps and things like that, we do curb extensions that help us to make the cars to slow down. And again, they really promote a lot of green health by supporting these self-watering landscapes. Remembering that with the context of this event today, while we are promoting all these other benefits of the blue-green infrastructure, which is keeping the green infrastructure healthy and providing cooling impacts for increasing heat waves, the core of all this work started looking into how we could capture, filter, and attenuate flows, surface urban flows, before they reach our precious waterways. So this is an example of how infiltration trench could work. The water is captured from the road carriage, directed through the tree roots and allowing the trees to get some water from that subsurface reservoir. We have a very interesting project at City of Melbourne as well, which is looking into our small laneways. City of Melbourne, the city itself, the CBD area, has more than 13 hectares of laneways, which are these small streets that are highly impervious and often quite shaded areas because of the constrained and a lot of build-up areas, a lot of buildings. And we had this very interesting project where we partner with the community and with the private realm, in the case the building owners and residents and business in these areas, to see how we could make these areas more greener. And this was a very interesting project where we partnered with them and went through our laneways, putting pot plants, as you can see, but also we tested this approach that we call drain gardens. Drain gardens are those small gardens where we direct the roof rainwater through down pipes that are already there, and intercept that water with a little box and a little soil planting filter media here that assist any type of planting growing. As you can see here, this is a wall one that's growing up. And that has been really shown to be a successful project, making these areas way more attractive, providing a lot of amenity, and in fact, bringing business and cafes to these lanes. These are very simple designs that are easy to implement and promote simple use of the rainwater from the roofs and help increase greening in our laneways. All this is really amazing and important, but it's really important that we look at them as a integrated catchment approach. We're having them in strategic places where we really need assets to help us treating stormwater and also providing the other benefits. And this means not placing them in upstream areas where we don't have enough area catchment or similar, but putting them in strategic places where they can receive water and help us delivering the benefits. And to exemplify what we have been doing in terms of looking at that through a more integrated catchment approach, I'll just show you very quickly, talk to you about a project we are developing at the moment that is looking into how we can use this distributed nature-based solutions to help us manage urban flood. This case is an example of a urban catchment, which is right in the center of city of Melbourne. This is the city CBD, and this catchment is called the Elizabeth Street catchment. This catchment has originally been built over two creeks that used to run through this drainage line and this drainage line. So you can imagine the impacts that we see from that type of construction when the Europeans arrived in here, that meaning that they channelized the creek, and not only that, by channelizing the creek, they created obviously a lot of overland flows with all the impervious areas that were generated. But not only that, we end up building a train station just around here, which is a big building, which means that when the drainage network is over capacity, the overland flows start running and they just meet this big station as a barrier. As a result, all this area that I'm pointing with my mouse are very flood prone and suffer very current and frequent flash flooding. We did many assessments for this area and flood modeling, and we realized that just upgrading pipes and pumps was not possible anymore because we don't even have space for underground infrastructure anymore. So that's when we start looking at how blue-green infrastructure can help us augment the life of this hard infrastructure, the pipes and pits, and also help us to contain stormwater on the surface and hold this water until the flood is passed or the rainfall is passed and slowly released into the drainage. This is just a very novel concept that we are looking at, and we are looking into how these different systems that I just showed you before can help. What we do different is that, for example, for the rain gardens, we are looking into building rain gardens with a little bit more of ponding area, and also in a more strategic way where they are built at certain distance from each other and they are connected by drainage or subsurface drainage, so they can work as a network of rain gardens. A lot of use of permeable pavements and what we call retarding basins that have green areas that are often dry, but they work as water storage when we go through the flood, and that's an example of it. Well, that was it. Sorry. So my presentation was quite practical. I hope you enjoyed, and I can ask any questions if you have.
Thank you, Dr. Cynthia, for your informative talk, full of ideas, especially because there was a flood today in my city, Maringá. So, thank you very much. Na sequência, teremos a fala da doutora Vasiliki Bolomits, intitulada Highlights about the Water Sensitive City Strategy at Fisherman's Bend, Australia. A doutora Vasiliki é engenheira civil pela USP, mestre e doutora pela Unicamp, docente no Instituto Federal de São Paulo, no campus de Caraguatatuba, e pesquisadora colaboradora na Universidade de Melbourne, Austrália. Dr. Vasiliki, we're glad you could join us. You may begin whenever you are ready, and you have 15 minutes.
Olá, podem me ouvir?
Perfeitamente.
Ok, boa noite a todos. Como a doutora Aniele falou, eu sou professora licenciada do Instituto Federal de Caraguatatuba, também pesquisadora da TWRA, e atualmente eu estou desenvolvendo a gestão estratégica de projetos de inovação na área de gestão integrada de recursos hídricos na City of Port Phillip, que é vizinha ali da City of Melbourne. E eu vou agora apresentar para vocês um pouquinho da nossa gestão estratégica, de alguns pontos importantes, de uma área que está em desenvolvimento. A minha apresentação será em inglês, porque, como coautora dessa apresentação, eu tenho a minha gerente, né, de projetos, e ela não pode estar presente hoje, mas ela vai estar assistindo posteriormente, então eu quero que isso fique acessível para ela e também para todos os colegas que atuam conosco nesse projeto. Deixa eu só share screen. Vocês podem observar minha tela?
Sim.
Okay. Bom, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the highlights of the water sensitive city strategy at Fisherman's Bend, which is in the city of Port Phillip and in the city of Melbourne in Australia. About the city of Port Phillip, we are the most densely populated municipality within the Great Melbourne area. It is a small piece of land with only 20.7 square kilometers, but it has 11 kilometers of beach foreshore, and about 2.8 million visitors come to our city, which represents the second most visited city after the city of Melbourne in the Great Metropolitan Area of Melbourne. The city of Port Phillip is one of the Melbourne's most vulnerable consols to water impacts because it's right on the coastal area near a low-lying flat flooding area. There are lots of vulnerabilities because of being densely populated, and also because of the design of assets and a lot of heritage area that have been there for more than a century. As a water-sensitive city, we face these challenges by working with the balance of the urban water cycle, This is what we aim to protect the environment and improve the water security for the community by the use of different water resources, not only the regular one, and also the innovative approaches to treat these kinds of different impacts. Climate change is a very significant risk to the area because, as I mentioned, it is on the coastal area and it's very low-lying. So it is our legal responsibility to take care of our assets because this is what's going to guarantee the community well-being and the safety of our natural resources. What kind of risks are we talking about? We have storm damage, we have storm surges causing a lot of erosion and inundation, flash flooding, heat waves, problems with air quality and eventual droughts. In the long-term process, we can also identify the risk of having impact caused by the sea level rise, the average minimum temperatures that aim to increase 1.6 degrees Celsius, and water insecurity. Some of the impacts that have already been identified since for our municipalities that since 1910, we already identified 1 degree Celsius of increase. Since 1966, the sea level rise has already increased 10 centimeters. Only in 2019, we already had 1.52 degrees warmer than the previous years in a long-term evaluation process, in a long series. Australia's driest year was also in that same period. That was about 40% less of rainfalls. If we look ahead, which is why I'm going to talk about this strategy, we identified that by 2050, we will have 2.4 degrees of increase in our temperature, extreme weather, which means that we're going to have very intense rainfalls coming for short periods of time in a frequency that is going to be higher than it has been in the previous years, and also 24 centimeters of increase in our sea level rise, which is terrible for coastal areas. So Fisherman's Bend is a huge development area that actually is shared between the two municipalities of City of Melbourne and the City of Port Phillip. It is the largest urban renewal development in the whole Australia. It covers 480 hectares connecting Melbourne CBD to the Bay. By 2050, there will be about extra 8,000 people living in the area and more 8,000 people working there. It has five precincts, and all these precincts are actually very low-lying. So all of them suffer the same kinds of impacts, varying a little bit because of the water table level within each one of the precincts. So let me tell you a little bit about the history and geographical background. At the beginning of last century, this area was pretty developed for industrial purpose. So they had cement industries, they even had aviation industries during the war period. And then we had, because of all these industries, it was necessary to improve the infrastructure in the area. So basically the port and the road infrastructure was giant since that period. It started, in 1960, and till now, there is a lot of improvement in the infrastructure of this area. We still have the port industry that is very, significant in that area, a major here in Australia. And then at the end of last century, we restarted developing this area for residential purpose and services. So now many of the industries have been deactivated, and now we have these areas being transformed to bring the community a good environment for them to live in and to work in. But we have some issues that have happened in this area because of the background. First of all, the land contamination. We have groundwater contamination in several spots. We can see that, you know, in all these areas that are circled with the orange little circle, because these are the areas that have been audited by the environmental agency. Some areas are restricted for groundwater use because of being, you know, contaminated. So it brings us a little bit of water insecurity due to the lack of possibility of using this water for, you know, supply. And at the same time, we cannot actually allow this water to contaminate the rest. So the kind of management on the assets has to be very innovative. We have the regular geotechnical conditions that we have in every single coastal area worldwide, which offers low hydraulic conductivity, making it very hard for us to allow infiltration. It's because of all that, flood prone, which means that because of being near, you know, Iara River, because of having low lying and also being impacted by the tidal events, and having aged infrastructure because it's been there for more than 100 years, part of the drainage. Some has been rebuilt, others are going to be expanded. So we have some capacity constraints. So all that make it flood prone. So the idea for our integrated water management is to collaborate with the flood management, with the climate resilient water system, and also urban ecology. This is all within the strategy, the water sensitive city strategy that was prepared only for the Fisherman's Bend development area. The main purpose is to incorporate flood mitigation alternatives that I'm going to talk to you about, because this is what we mainly work in our sustainability team. But we also have these other purposes that are treated by different areas, right? By the planning people, by the open space people, by the rest of the sustainability team. To do that, we have to use traditional and non-traditional approaches, which means that we are not only going to use the regular drainage network, we are going to include some other possibilities to improve their capacity. And this is what I'm going to talk about, the innovation that is used in this approach, that are the distributed storages and the smart rainwater tanks. So if we had nothing, you know, in the future and only had our approaches being like the traditional way, we would have this kind of flood, you know, extents by 2100. But if we use these mitigation alternatives, we are probably going to have only these areas flooded. So the difference is really significant to improve the conditions of the area. So talking a little bit about the distributed storages, because this terminology is not so well known worldwide, what they are. Basically, they are engaged to the existing drainage network and they operate as offline storages to reach the capacity that we could not reach if we only had the traditional approach. They're located on the streets. So it could be within linear parks, tree pits, rain gardens, as Cynthia mentioned, and also in lowered open spaces when needed to compensate the area that we cannot achieve only by using these street areas. So here we can see how it works. You know, if we have a 20% AP event, so annual exceedance probability, which is a 5-year event, which is commonly well now in Brazil, right? We generally use this kind of terminology, and here in Australia, we use this kind of terminology. So we would only have this kind of flow. Then, if we start, having 10-year events or 20-year events, or even the most extreme events of 100 years, we would have the street flooded and also the pits and, eventually the open space areas that were reserved for that. So this is an alternative to keep our private realms safe and also to protect the rest of our assets, public assets. There is some study development worldwide about the effectiveness of using distributed storage. For example, Salazar et al. Considered that when they studied this kind of retention in European landscapes, but not using it connected to the drainage network, there were some things that were not really going to be ideal for us here at the city of Port Phillip or at Fisherman's Bend, right? So what they concluded is that for the flood mitigation, it would depend on the rainfall events, which is okay, the kind of moisture in the soil, which is also okay, but also the spatial distribution of the flood management measures in the catchment. And then it's difficult because we have lots of different aged infrastructure assets, so it's hard for us to depend on their effectiveness all the time. That's why we are trying to use an innovative approach. So if we don't work together, then it could represent a certain risk for the effectiveness of this flood retention. They also found out that they're effective for small and medium events. And this is not when we have our peak flood events, right? When we have our extreme flood events. We mostly have these large events when it's really extreme. So we are talking about at least 20-year plus events. So it's almost negligible for the largest events and less frequent floods. At Fisherman's Bend, they will be alternative in large events, as I mentioned, so it will be connected to the drainage network. We cannot allow it to be totally disconnected and to work separately. And this is basically because our soil has problems with infiltration, and also because of, our flat hours do not allow us to have a perfect flow. It's always diffuse flow when we have this kind of events. And because of that, the velocity is pretty much slow, for this flow to be discharged towards the coast. Di also studied about this possibility of controlling distributed storages for rare and long duration terms. And here we expect that for distributed storages at Fisherman's Bend, we are going to work with at least 20-year events, as I mentioned before. So this is what our investigation came up with, that some of the open spaces will have, distributed storage reserved for the areas, and also part of the street that will be covered with these extreme events using the connection with the distributed storage and the drainage network. But of course, nobody has to worry, because what the main question is, but what if kids are playing in the open space areas? But kids are not going to be playing these open space areas when we have events that are, higher than 20-year plus. So don't worry about it. It's a strategy that has multiple purpose, but we think about this kind of extreme events, and it's not going to offer any kinds of problems for the community. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about, let me just see here. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about how it works. You know, we would have here this flowing into the different kinds of events, but also using smart rainwater tanks, right? So what does it mean? If we have smart rainwater tanks, because everybody knows what rainwater tanks is, but we always think about the possibility of using water, reusing water for our babies. But we can also use that as a temporary retention for our water. And this temporary reservoir is going to help us save space from the public assets to store water. So if we combine this approach with the distributed storage and with the regular drainage capacity, we are going to have an expansion of the capacity, right? But why do we call it smart? This is why innovation comes with. Because it's going to be controlled by weather forecasting data. So before the events, all these tanks are going to discharge the water that they have within the tank to the drainage network. And then when it starts raining, it's going to be empty and ready to reserve water for this temporary period till the drainage goes back to normal. So that's why it is innovative, and it's going to be controlled based on the weather forecast. Lian also had some good studies about it, and Lian et al., and they concluded that it could reduce the peak system outflows in a rate that is between 35 and 50% compared to the traditional ones, right? Without using this kind of system. Benzadian et al. Also concluded that the smart rainwater tanks, they could improve the integrated water management because it's not only, good for harvesting and reusing water, improving the water security purpose, but also for flood mitigation. And this was tested, right, in some of their systems. So for Fisherman's Bend, there is one important thing, besides, reducing the peak discharge at some specific events, we are going to guarantee that there is a primary source of non-potable water because we are going to have alternative water there. We also have a recycling water plant that is part of the strategy that is going to be implemented there by the water corp bodies, right? And for that, we have a third pipe. So this third pipe is going to provide water, even though the water tank is empty, preparing to receive the water from the rainfall. So it doesn't mean that the buildings are not going to have the alternative water to be reused within their system. Now, bringing it all together, is it really, what kind of questions do we have to ask every time we think about developing a project? Is it in a flood zone? How is it now and how is it going to be in the future? Will it increase downstream flooding? Because people always develop the areas that are upstream without thinking about what's going to happen downstream. So this is a basic question for every urban planner. How is the condition going to be once we have this huge development in the upstream areas? What are the drainage infrastructure constraints? Are they going to cope with the purpose of protecting our assets only, using the traditional approach? Or will they be able to use other alternative approaches as the ones that we are proposing to improve their capacity? Can the site meet permeability requirements? So can we have the traditional infiltration methods or no? Is there a potential to use alternative water resources? What is the feasibility of having this kind of recycling water plant in the area? Is there potential? Is the open space also being changed can we guarantee that we're going to have a multiple purpose area in these open spaces so that they can also be used to protect the other assets from floods? In our case, it's our common question. Is it located in the Fisherman's Bend because of the specific problems we have in the area, like land contamination, underground water constraints, drainage constraints, and so on? Is it likely to be impacted by storm surge or sea level rise? Are we going to have additional measures like a levee or other kinds of protections? How can we project and mitigate stormwater pollution? Are we worried about what kind of water quality we will have on our beaches? As Cynthia said in her presentation, lots of the WASDs, the water sensitive urban design infrastructure, are mainly to protect our stormwater quality so that when they go into the ocean, our beaches are clean and they're not polluted by what is caused within the city, you know, because of the increase of runoff. Will the project create a stormwater runoff? How are you going to treat that to protect it from going to the construction site to the regular drainage network? Is there any kind of water usage available in the future for the increase of population that will live in the area? Are we thinking about alternative water resources to be provided for this community? So this is everything we have to have in mind when we have general development, but this is what we have, you know, in our minds at the city of Port Phillip when we think about all kinds of developments that will be built within the Fisherman's Bend. Oops, sorry. So I would like to thank you so much for your attention. And I would like to mention that this project of working at the Fisherman's Bend is not only particular for the city of Port Phillip. For the development of this water sensitive strategy, there was a huge group. And part of this group is also Cynthia's group from the city of Melbourne, and also the task force for the Fisherman's Bend, and also Melbourne Water, Southeast Water, Yara Water. So there are lots of different stakeholders that take part of this project. Thank you so much for your attention. And in case you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Dr. Vasiliki. A última fala da nossa noite será da professora Júlia Cirillo. Júlia é professora, especialista em educação para a sustentabilidade, coordenadora do projeto Water Watch, coordenadora de vigilância da água e resposta rápida ao lixo após chuva, no Comitê de Gestão de Mary Creek, e nos falará sobre este projeto de ciência cidadã, Water Watch, using citizen science to understand and change water quality outcomes for local waterways and communities. Julia, it's a pleasure to welcome you. You have 15 minutes and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Obrigado. It's lovely to meet you all. Hopefully you can all hear me well. If not, let me know. Yes, as I've been introduced, my name is Julia Cirillo and I work at the Mary Creek Management Committee in citizen science. So lots of education around protecting our waterways, in particular the Mary Creek. So I will share my presentation now and tell you a lot more about what we do. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional owners' land, the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of the land in the Mary Mary. And Meri in Wurundjeri actually means rocky because the creek is traditionally very rocky from our previous volcanic history that we have in this area. You can see some photographs here of a lot of our volunteers. So a lot of our community is very connected to the Mary Creek and other waterways, and they like to get involved in the citizen science projects. You can see them there. Today, I'm just going to talk about the current ecological health of the Merri Creek. So the Merri Creek will be my case study, the citizen science programs that we run at Merri Creek Management Committee, and how we are tracking. Are we seeing improvements in the water quality? I also do have lots of resources you'll see on the left-hand side that are on our website, and I'm happy to provide links to those resources if you would like that information later. So Vasiliki and Chinta have talked quite a bit about Melbourne, so I think you all have a bit more of an idea of Melbourne and how it looks. This is just an aerial view of the city of Melbourne, our central business district. And you can see one of our major waterways is Bidyung, or the Yarra River, flowing right through the central business district. The creek that I'm going to talk about in Melbourne, the Merri Creek, and my apologies for this terrible map, but the Merri Creek here on the right picture is a major tributary of the Yarra River, or Bidyung, and the Yarra River flows into Melbourne, and that's where Chintia and Vasiliki's municipalities are located further downstream from the Merri Creek. The picture on the left is the Merri Creek in its entirety. It's over 70 kilometres long, so it does start in the foothills just north of Melbourne. So it's quite a large creek, and it has lots of diverse uses. So downstream where it joins Bidyung, or the Yarra River, it actually has a lot of urban urban structure there, so lots of houses, lots of development, but further upstream there is still some farmland, but it is changing to development. I just wanted to show this map, even though it's a little bit old now. It's from 2007, and it's actually showing an analysis of the rivers and creeks in Melbourne. So this is a map of the Melbourne area and the major tributaries and creeks that you can see there. So you can see the red line. The red lines are representing our rivers and creeks that are in poor condition, ecologically poor. So they assess them using a number of ranges of assessment. So it can be stormwater, like Vasiliki was talking about with the stormwater pollution. It's also how much habitat is on the rivers and creeks. It's also looking at the life, what plants and animals are actually in the life, some of our native species like fish and birds and frogs. And it also looks at the bank stability, how healthy are the banks of the rivers of the creeks. So do they have erosion? Are they unstable? Are they moving? So at the time this study was done in 2007, it showed that 25%, or 1/4, of our rivers and creeks in Melbourne were in good or excellent condition. And they are shown as blue and green lines. So you can see they are in what we call the upper catchment. And that's what we call the closed catchment. So lots of those areas are actually closed off to people living there. And that's where a lot of our drinking water comes from. So it's a bit of a shame, because you can see where most of the red areas are, 75% are in moderate to very poor condition, is where most people live, which is shown in the pink, the peach area there. So it shows that, unfortunately, in Melbourne, where lots of people are living, we're still not very good at looking after our rivers and creeks and keeping them healthy. This is the top catchment, the upper catchment to the Merri Creek. You can see that map on the right-hand side, and this one's actually from 2018, so much more recent. And you can see where the long green line is, that's the Merri Creek representative, and there's lots of vegetation, lots of plants around that part of the creek, and some of the area, the wetlands and upper parts of the creek is still closed off in some sections. However, you can see towards the bottom of the upper catchment around Craigieburn and Donnybrook and Mickleham, all of these areas are having massive development. So lots of houses are being built, and we're having lots of different issues with that. So I think the thing about Melbourne is that while it's really great to see a lot of these stormwater, water-sensitive urban design projects happening around Port Phillip Bay, around the ocean, not enough is happening in the upper catchments as yet to protect them. And without that, that water will become polluted and end up in the ocean anyway. So we really need to start from the beginning, not just the end. So I'm going to go through some of the major threats as well. This is the lower part of the Mary Creek, you can see here, and you can see not as much vegetation, very heavily built up with houses and high density housing, and pretty much very concreted. So we're having lots of different issues with that. One other thing I want to mention too is that we also look at how healthy our creeks are by looking at some of the plants and animals that call it home and whether they're there or not, presence or absence. So riparian birds are very important to see whether they're moving through the system and living in those areas. Fish species currently in the Mary Creek, predominantly the fish species we have living in the creek are actually introduced. They're not from that area, they're not indigenous. Frogs are also a really important bioindicator. Currently, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of frog species living directly in the creek. They are in the surrounding lakes and ponds and wetlands, but not necessarily in the creek, apart from a few instances. Also, aquatic microinvertebrates or water bugs are also very important. They are a food source for frogs, fish and birds, and of course our very important monotreme, the platypus. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the platypus, but it's one of only 2 monotremes in the world, egg-laying mammals that produce milk as well. So they give birth they lay eggs and then the eggs hatch. And we have the only 2 in the world, other than with Papua New Guinea, the echidna and the platypus. The platypus are supposed to occur naturally in the Mary Creek, but unfortunately, it's just not, it's not healthy enough to support them at this stage because there's not enough water bugs. And our vegetation score is low as well and needs to be improved. However, what's really good at the moment is community connection, amenity, and recreation. The local community use the parks around the creek and are very concerned about the creek. So we can use that to our advantage. So some of the water quality challenges in Melbourne, Vasiliki and Cintia talked a bit about the stormwater pollution. So things like on the left here, you can see sedimentation. So lots of soil coming in from development and from the roads. We also have lots of problems with detergent. So soapy water coming into the creeks from factories, from people washing their cars, because our stormwater drains are not treated. The water's not filtered. So we get over 60,000 truckloads of litter enter our waterways each year via these stormwater systems in Melbourne. 50% of this is cigarette butts, though that is changing. I think now instead of smoking cigarettes, there's people smoking vapes instead, but they still produce plastic if they're using disposable vapes. So the majority of the litter that we're getting within the Mary Creek is plastic. Soft plastic bags, plastic bottles, polystyrene, those kinds of things. So that's still a big problem, though we do get sometimes factory spills. This is an ink spill from a local factory. And then, of course, people in their homes, if they're not, if they mow their lawn and don't pick up their grass clippings and actually sweep up their leaves, if they're using too many herbicides and pesticides, that ends up in the creek as well. We also have a problem with weeds, so plants that are not from the local Mary Creek, introduced plants. They can cause loss of habitat. They can actually sometimes shade out the ground level so other plants can't grow. They can change the flow, how much velocity and flow we have in the creek, and they can also sometimes even change the hydrogeology of the creek as well. Then you can get things like the bed and bank erosion, which is obviously the work that Cinta and Vasilika are doing is to try and reduce the bed and bank erosion, making sure that our creeks are more stable, have more stable banks, and that they still have some organic soil on the banks so plants can grow. With the erosion, we get an issue with turbidity. Turbidity being the increase of sediment and other organic matter like plant matter in our rivers and creeks. You can see the picture on the top left is actually of the Mary Creek after rainfall, We've had lots of soil coming into the creek. Normally the creek is, you can actually see the bottom. It's quite clear. It has quite a high clarity. But when it rains, unfortunately, it turns into looking that colour, which is obviously not the way it should happen naturally. This is indicating that further upstream, that all the urban development that's going on, that unfortunately the developers are not have not so far been able to contain a lot of that soil when it rains in their current sedimentation treatment processes. So things need to change there. You can see in the graph down the bottom, the blue line is representing all the turbidity water quality data that citizen scientists have collected in the space of 6 years and on certain different parts of the creek. And you can see that there is an uphill trend, that the turbidity is increasing. And that is to do with the urban development. It's also to do with climate change. As Vasiliki mentioned, climate change, we are having higher rainfall events. And you can see that the high rainfall events in the orange graph, when the high rainfall occurs, there is usually a similar pattern trend line in the turbidity data. We also have loss of habitat. So some sections of the Merri Creek and other creeks like this one called the Moonee Ponds Creek doesn't have much habitat for the plants and animals, which decreases the water quality. So there's some sections like this that are still highly concreted. We also have barriers to our fish, such as dams, such as this. This is a dam wall in Coburg Lake, which is on the Merri Creek. So our fish species can't move upstream and downstream to breed. They have been putting in some of these things called fish ladders as well to try and help the fish move up the creek, but obviously they're not going to be as successful as having a creek flowing. So that's some of the issues. Let's actually talk about some of the solutions as well. So this part of the creek you can see here, this is the Merri Creek, and we can see it's looking pretty fantastic. This is what a healthy ecosystem should look like. And what we've got here is lots of habitat for birds and bats. We have a lot of bat species here with the river redgums as the upper catchment. And they also regulate the water temperature, which really helps with our climate change. They provide habitat for birds, insects, platypus, and water rats, which is our native otter. They increase riverbank stability, so we don't have that erosion and turbidity. They also buffer floods as well, and flows and exchange of nutrients occurs much more easily as well. So this is what we need to start putting back in a lot of sections, particularly in the upper parts of the Merri Creek. Vasiliki and Tinta have talked about water-sensitive urban design and solutions, so I'm going to skip over that, and because I think we've really had a good in-depth how that's working. And the only thing I want to say on that is we need more of that happening in the upper part of the Merri Creek, which is slowly happening. But what I mainly focus on is the citizen science program. So the community really want to be involved and really want to see the creek improve in its health, in its ecological health. So we provide those experiences for them for free. The local municipalities, the local councils, and our water board, Melbourne Water, provide most of the funding to where I work, the Merri Creek Management Committee, because we're a not-for-profit organisation, and we then run these programs. I work with schools. You can see I'm working with a primary school, Antonine College, on the Merri Creek. They're doing some turbidity testing. That's what the long plastic tubes are that they're holding. And I also work with adults, and you can see them above there collecting some water bugs. So some of the programs that we run at Merri Creek Management Committee, citizen science programs, include frog census. So we collect information on the population and species of frogs in order to help management decisions to make sure we're protecting areas that need to be protected. And it's a lot of fun going out there, listening. We basically use their calls. Each frog species makes a different frog noise to call to attract a mate. So the male, as you can see here, it has attracted a female. This is our local Perrins tree frog. And they use a call for the female to find them. And we can use that to actually track populations and species rather than directly going out to find them. So we run a lot of events training people how to do that and use the app. Water Watch, of course, so we do water testing, things including turbidity, pH, levels of salinity, which can be a problem in our creeks in Melbourne and Australia. We also look at nutrients like phosphate and ammonium, which is a form of nitrogen. We also look at turbidity and dissolved oxygen. Obviously, dissolved oxygen is a very important parameter because it can, if we don't have good oxygen levels in our creeks, water bugs, frogs, fish won't be able to survive. We also have a litter program, which I'll talk a bit more as well about Litter Watch Victoria, where we collect litter and have a citizen science program. There's a great app called iNaturalist, which people can use to identify plants and animals and also collect data on where these plants and animals are. We also are involved with Birds Australia that have a wonderful program called Birds in the Backyard, where people record their bird species in their backyard. We also help, there's a national, so Australia-wide program called Water Bug Blitz, where we collect information on the aquatic macroinvertebrates or water bugs. And you can see, some of our team collecting water bugs there. We also have a program on platypus as well, which I'll talk a bit more about as well, about recording the species of platypus if we do find them in the Mary Creek, which I'll talk about briefly next. So I guess the big question we get asked is, have these programs improved the water quality? As yet, I can say no, not much improvement is evidence as yet, other than the habitat has improved by all the tree planting that volunteers have done. But we need a lot more of those projects that Vasiliki and Chinta were talking about in the upper areas to see changes. But the community are all very informed and active. For example, I've got 30 volunteers every month that monitor the water quality of 12 sites in 8 groups. In 21-22, I had over 4,000 school children participate in citizen science activities. And our litter program last year, we had 747 participants at 71 events, remove close to 95,000 pieces of litter from the Mary Creek. So the program is very active and people are very involved. And we've been able to collect data like you can see on the screen now, that we have a really good idea of what litter is contained in the creek when we remove it so that we can deal with it in a better way. As you can see, most of it is plastic. The first 5 areas here, our common litter items, are made out of some sort of plastic. So that's obviously one of our biggest areas that we need to tackle, need to keep working on. Monitoring and citizen science is a really big thing in Victoria. This is a map of Victoria. This is from our annual achievements report for 22-23. And you can see we have over nearly close to 3,000 volunteers in 125 groups, which equates to over 14,000 participants monitoring birds, fish, litter, frogs, water bugs, water quality and platypus at all these sites in Victoria. So it's a very healthy, active program. And we have a lot of data to help us make management decisions. We also have a lot of information you can access on our website. So we have water quality summaries, we have information on litter. So the groups that collect the litter, that all goes into an online portal. The frog census I mentioned as well. There's also pesticide detectives, turbidity monitoring, and there's been community sensor projects as well. All of this is online and available for anyone to access. Something I want to mention really briefly before I go, because I know I'm running out of time, is the Merry Paddle. This is a volunteer group that started 2 years ago, and their main aim, so they're all volunteers, is to improve the Merry Creek so we see the return of the platypus. As I mentioned, we don't have a viable population of platypus on the Merry Creek. So this group has been working really hard, doing lots of citizen science monitoring, and the aim is that all of this information that we're collecting, we've got 14 sites that we're focusing on, collecting the litter from, looking for platypus, doing water testing, and involving stakeholders to actually improve the water quality. So all of this is to do with the citizen science projects. Without the citizen science, we wouldn't have all the volunteers interested to be doing this work. And that's the end. I know I've run out of time, so I will stop there. But if there's any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Julia. There was a question for Dr. Cynthia and Dr. Vasiliki, but she had to leave us. The answers of the questions are in the chat. And for Dr. Julia, I have a question.
I'm not doctor, by the way, so you don't need to say that.
Sorry?
I'm not a doctor, so you can just say Julia.
Oh, sorry.
So there's a question for me, did you say?
Yes, I like very much of citizen science, and I'd like to hear from you, based on this experience of you have. What do you think about the future of citizen science in the control of the impacts from climate change?
I think it's very important. I think that what's fantastic is Water Watch, the program, for instance, has been running for over 30 years in Victoria alone and in some other states of Australia. So we already have some really good data from 20, 30 years ago. And going forward, we want to keep collecting that data. So we actually will have evidence to see, well, how much impact has climate change actually had? We believe there is a lot of impact, but we will now have the hard evidence to show that. So I think moving forward and continuing to sponsor these volunteers to do the citizen science is really important. So we do have that data to show how much impact climate change is having, so that we can keep putting in this infrastructure that Vasiliki and Chinta were talking about.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if you have more questions. There is one from Robertson Azevedo. Are there concerns and strategies about sea level rise in Melbourne?
Yes, definitely. Obviously, Vasiliki could talk a bit more to this, but that's exactly right. With the climate change and having more high rainfall events, there is obviously predicted more sea level rises in the Melbourne area. And as Vasiliki mentioned, in the next few years, 80,000 more people are planning to live in the metropolitan area of Melbourne. So I know that this is probably a better question for Chinta, but because she works for the City of Melbourne, which is the CBD area, they have been working on a lot of strategies to actually reduce sea level rises. But a lot of that at the moment is actually the stormwater harvesting. So actually harvesting the rainwater that's coming in and the smart tanks. So that's what they're using at the moment. But I'm sure that there needs to be a lot more work to make sure that, especially with the sea level rises, whether they need to be putting walls in or other sort of infrastructure to work with that. So I'm sure Chinta would have a lot more information on that, but I know they are working on that.
Thank you. One more question from Gabriele Regazzi. Have you been able to see the impact of this project on the population's relationship with waste and pollution in general?
That's a really good question. I don't think we have enough data yet. So, for example, with the litter collection, our volunteers are collecting litter along the Mary Creek and some of the other creeks, and we've only been collecting data for about 3 years. So it's a little bit hard to see whether there's been an improvement. I think the thing is, because we've had more volunteers come and pick up more litter. So it doesn't mean that there's more litter. It just means that more volunteers are going out to collecting it. So I'm actually now trying to come up with a strategy where we might have 10 sites that we try and remove litter each year, so we can actually compare it. You know, when you're collecting data, you need to compare apples with apples. You can't, collect a whole lot of data one year and then not much the next. You can't really compare it then. So I think we need just a better scientific data set to see whether our litter and pollution has dropped. We are hoping so. In Victoria, they've introduced a container deposit scheme where people can take their recycling and get money for it. And we've also had policies, legal policies have been passed where single-use plastic can no longer be sold. So things like, disposable plastic plates for picnics and things like that, and plastic bags can no longer be sold, or straws, so plastic straws. And I must say, just from my observations, that I'm seeing much less plastic straws in our waterways. So just with that policy change, we're already seeing those changes. And that's why it's really important to collect this data, because we want to see if a law has been changed, has there been a change in the amount of litter that we're getting? That's why we've got to keep collecting this data.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if you have more questions. No more. Vou lembrar em português, então, o Herman Vargas e o Gilson Corrêa de Carvalho, que a resposta da pergunta de vocês está no chat. Gostaria de chamar, então, a doutora Rosilene de volta à tela. Só um minuto. Before we finish, I want to say a big thank you to our special speakers today, Dr. Cynthia, Dr. Vasiliki, and Julia. You all did an amazing job sharing your smarts about nature-based solutions in urban areas. Your talks were really helpful. Thanks for being awesome teachers and make today super interesting. Então, antes de terminarmos, quero agradecer muito às nossas palestrantes especiais de hoje. Vocês fizeram um trabalho incrível compartilhando seus conhecimentos sobre o tema. Suas palestras foram realmente úteis. Então, Rosilene, você tem a palavra agora.
Obrigada, Aniele. Obrigada a todas as palestrantes dessa noite, a doutora Yara, a doutora Vasiliki, a doutora Júlia e a doutora Cíntia, e nós, então, agradecemos imensamente a todos os nossos participantes, os ouvintes pelo YouTube, aqui juntamente com a nossa plataforma Zoom, e convido, então, novamente para compartilhar conosco todo esse rol de informações que nós temos durante esse nosso evento. Amanhã nós teremos uma programação intensa, desde as 8h30 da manhã, e esperamos contar com todos por aqui, tá? Nosso muito obrigado a todos, e nós nos veremos em breve amanhã. Uma boa noite a todos e até amanhã.